Good evening, members and members of the public. Before we proceed with this evening's planning meeting, I know that all the councillors here and the officers will be aware of the sad passing of Councillor Brian Ellis last week. Brian served this council very well, very ably for 21 years, and especially serving his ward of Cranley, and was also a Cranley parish councillor, and he will be greatly missed. I especially valued his wise counsel when I first sat alongside him as deputy chairman of this committee. So I would just ask if we could have a quiet minute's reflection on the life and the hard work of Brian. Thank you. Thank you, and welcome, Patricia. As Morris said on Monday, you're very brave to be here, but I know that you will, of course, carry on fighting for your constituents, just as Brian would have wanted you to. Right, before I commence the meeting properly, I'd like to draw your attention to the fire regulations which are on the screen behind me and the small screen up there. Also, please can you ensure that your mobile phones are switched to silent, and councillors, can I please remind you to speak directly into the microphone and make sure that your card is pushed firmly into the console. Members of the public, I would like to say that as a committee we understand that matters under consideration tonight can be emotive. However, please be respectful of those around you in the public gallery and the committee, and refrain from any booing, cheering or any other form of disturbance. So now we move to the main items of business. The minutes of the last minute, the minutes of the meeting, which took place on the 7th of September 2016, have been laid on the table for the last 30 minutes. Are you content that I sign these as correct record of that meeting? Thank you. Apologies for absence. Gary.
Thank you, Chairman. We've received apologies of absence from councillors Mike Band, Michael Goodridge, John Gray, Stuart Stennett, Jeanette Stennett and Kevin Denis.
Thank you. Declarations of interest. Have members declared any interest before the meeting?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, Councillor Val Henry has declared a non-pecuniary interest in items A1 and A2 on tonight's agenda, as she's a member of Ewhurst Parish Council Planning Committee.
Thank you. Have there been any questions received from members of the public?
Any other declaration?
Do members have any other non-pecuniary or disclosable pecuniary interest to declare? Jolly good. Right, so moving on. Have there been any questions received from members of the public, Gary?
None received, Chairman.
Right. Relevant updates. Peter, are there any relevant updates of government guidance or legislation that the committee should be aware of?
Thank you, Chairman. No, I don't have any updates for you today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The quarterly appeals report. Tim, can you introduce the report to the committee, please?
Thank you, Chairman. Members, you'll see that I've set out, provided a detailed summary for each appeal case that's before you. So rather than go through each one, I will go through, just draw your attention to some of the more interesting cases within that list. So dealing with 0717, which is the first one there, this is an application for a new agricultural building. Officers sought advice from agricultural consultants from the council, who advised that there was plenty of accommodation on the site. So the refusal was on the back of that professional advice. However, the inspector disagreed with us in this instance, noting the sheer size of the farm holding and the existing buildings would not be fit for purpose. 1789 on page 7, Oak Cottage. I draw attention to this one as this is a home extension application. Inspector's decision mainly relating to policy RD2 of our local plan. The inspector gave limited weight to the numerical increase in floor space of the dwelling and noted the extensions would be in keeping with the dwelling will not harm the rural character of the area. So that policy is as always, an interesting policy we have to deal with day to day as officers. 0798, which is page 12. This is an application really for a one-bedroom flat, I believe, up in the town centre in Cranley. This is an interesting decision as it did test the council's parking guidelines. The inspector did note that the lack of on-site vehicle parking could not be objected to due to the town centre location. 2168, which is on page 17. The inspector was satisfied that the buildings will not be materially larger than the original which stood on site and considered not to be therefore an appropriate development in the green belt. The inspector was further happy that the proposal would be of an appropriate design that would preserve the conservation area. So that was despite the council's decision. 0404, this was a significant scheme for 10 dwellings on a greenfield site. The inspector considered that the site was not of high amenity value, however considered that the scale of development and its suburban form would harm the character of the settlement and conservation area, and specifically drawing upon paragraph 58 of the MPPF. And 1351, page 22, this is an appeal relating to conditions imposed on a permission, so quite a rare appeal, you could say. And the inspector disagreed with some of the wording, and particularly a condition regarding permitted development rights to be unreasonable in this instance. So, Chairman, those are really the main appeal decisions of interest. But I'm happy to take any questions from members. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Members, have you any questions for Tim or any comments to make? Thank you. Thank you, members. So we move on to the applications for planning permission. Just to note that in the event of site inspections being necessary as a result of consideration of the applications at this meeting, these will be held on Monday the 2nd of November 2016, but we did actually make site visits to both applications that we're considering tonight on Monday. We're going to take item A2 first of all, which is reference WA 2016 1209, land south of Cranley Road and west of Gadbridge Lane, Ewhurst. As I understand, there's been an update to this. Peter, would you like to introduce the application?
Well, Chairman, I'll take that.
Tim, would you like to?
Sorry. Yes, members. Today we report there is quite a significant update to the application. Officers have received today a late update from the Surrey Wildlife Trust regarding the response of the applicant to the applicant's ecology assessment. The Surrey Wildlife Trust feel there is a reasonable chance of dormice being on the site and affected by the proposal. The indicative planting information does not provide sufficient information to overcome the above concerns, and the proposed mitigation and compensation measures are not sufficient to ensure that the development would not be detrimental to the maintenance of the dormouse population at favourable conservation status in its natural range, and therefore meet the 3 Derogian tests of Regulation 53 of the Conservation of Habitats and Species Regulations 2010. Accordingly, at present, the Surrey Wildlife Trust have advised that granting planning permission for this development as proposed on the basis of currently available information may be contrary to the statutory objectives of the Conservation of Habitats and Species Regulations 2010 and the Wildlife and Countryside Act 1981. Therefore, officers have a revised recommendation that proposed application be deferred to allow time for applicants to submit the detailed information required to overcome the Surrey Wildlife Trust's concerns. So, just to repeat that the application is recommended now to be deferred Thank you, Chairman.
Right, members, have you any comments on this, or shall we move to the recommendation to defer? Councillor Henry.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this has come a bit of a surprise, and the gallery is full of a lot of people here that are wanting to have a say on this planning application. So I think I'm best to ask of you what the situation should be. As you see, we have a gallery full of a lot of expectant people, and I would ask your advice as to how we go about it. Thank you.
Okay. Officers, would you like to comment on that one? On that question?
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Henry. I think from that sort of question about how to proceed, and we do apologise for this late update, but of course it's important that you're aware of this information in response to the additional information firstly. So we want to make sure we're making a recommendation or considering the application on a sound basis. In terms of taking it forward, I do appreciate a lot of members of the public have come here tonight to consider the application. But from our point of view, it is recommended that you wouldn't be able to make a full decision on the application or an appropriate decision on the application in the absence of this detailed information. So what we are asking members for, not to refuse the application at this stage, but to allow officers to take it away, reconsider it, give the applicants the opportunity to address the concerns of Surrey Wildlife Trust, and then bring back revised information for us to consider. We will, of course, if it's necessary, reconsult with third parties, interested parties, to make any additional comments they may like to make on any additional information received, and take it from there. But I do appreciate that a number of people have come here tonight to consider it and put forward their comments. But the recommendation needs to be made on sound basis, and I think we need to look to what the Surrey Wildlife Trust are saying, take a view from that, and we'd ask members to consider that before we move into a full presentation of the application and listen to all the public speakers and take it away from there. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Henry, you'd like to come back?
May I ask of the officers, how long do you think we might have to wait to get a result on this?
Thank you, Chairman. We have already spoken to the applicants or the agents acting on their behalf, and they have indicated that they could address this additional, or the requirement for additional information, rather quickly, and we could bring it back to a next committee. But I can't guarantee that, because it depends on if they do need to do further survey work or anything on site, or if we need to reconsult, and that obviously takes time, and we need to give appropriate time for third parties, members of the public, any statutory consultees to make comment on the additional information if that is submitted. So I can't give a guaranteed time frame, but thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wojciechowski.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I would support the officer's recommendation because the report is incomplete and we can't make a sound judgment on the application until we have all the information before us. I think it's always disappointing that we have an update at this late date, and it's disappointing for people who've made the effort to come here this evening, but I think if we're to make an informed choice of our decisions when we're debating this, we need all the information before us. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Any other comments? Councillor Byam.
Yes, it's disappointing, obviously, for the members of the public sitting here, wondering what we're all going to say and what we think. I heard, within reason, the report, or sorry, the statement. Tim, your voice is not that strong from me anyway, so I didn't hear it properly, but it's not in the update sheets yet. I presume that will be published. The statement that's been made will be published so we can understand, both ourselves and the public can understand exactly what was said and where we're going.
There is an update sheet which should have been available to you, Councillor Byam. It's not online, but it is here this evening because it's just a late update from, or a late report from the Surrey Wildlife Trust.
Didn't pick that up. I hadn't realised. Thank you.
So, councillors, I move to the revised recommendation. It is recommended that the proposed application should be deferred to allow time for the applicants to submit the detailed information required to overcome Surrey Wildlife Trust concerns. All those in favour?
That's unanimously agreed.
Thank you. So, members of the public, I can only add to the apologies that you've already heard. This was something that came through to us at very much at the last minute, and but it's only fair that it's given due weight, and I'm sure that you would want it to be. So, if any of you wish to disperse now, I quite understand it if you'd like to leave the gallery. Thank you. Okay, so we revert back to item A1, reference WA 2016-0822, the Bull's Head, the Street, Ewhurst, GU6 7QD. Miles, would you like to introduce the application to the committee, please?
Thanks very much, Chair. This is an application for the erection of 4 dwellings with associated parking and landscaping following the demolition of existing outbuildings and extension, together with extensions and alterations to existing public house, parking provision, amenity space and relevant demolition of an unlisted building in a conservation area, as amplified by parking surveys undertaken in August 2016. If we just look at the site location plan, here we have the... Sorry, I beg your pardon. Yeah, okay. We have the public house here and the extension here and outbuilding here. As you see, it's surrounded by residents. It's in the middle of it. It's within the defined settlement area. The site area is approximately 2560 square metres, and the 4 market dwellings are between 130 and 190 square metres in floor area. There's 1 3-bed, 2 4-bed and a 5-bed. A new beer garden will be proposed, and we'll come on to that. Before we get to that, if you look at the aerial photo, you can see the Bull's Head here, and you can see the beer garden here, and then you have the Old Forge Cottage here, and quite a significant amount of screening along the boundary here. To go forward, this is actually the amended site plan. It's amended because the plans erroneously showed Old Forge Cottage to be closer to the boundary than it actually is. It's about 3 metres from the boundary there. And these are the proposed 4 houses here. As you see, the extension to the public house will be removed. There will be a vehicular access here, with parking to the rear and 2 parking spaces to the side to accommodate the parking for the new dwellings. For the pub, 16 car parking spaces will be retained with access off here, and a new beer garden will be to the rear. This will be a fairly modest single-storey rear extension to the rear of the pub. So that's the amended site plan showing the proposed layout of the development. And these are the elevations here. These are the houses, so you have the rear elevations here. You see it's 2-storey apart from a small area here with a 3-storey element there. It's set well back. If we go back to the site plan, it's set well back on a staggered building line from the public house and from the adjoining dwellings at Old Forge Cottage here to the rear. So it's looking to minimise the impact of the development. and the front elevation here. So we feel the design is in accordance with the character and appearance of the conservation area. And if there are the side elevations there. If we look then at the plans, you can see the layouts here at ground and first floor level. These are the proposed houses. And then this is second floor and roof plans. That's it in a little more detail. And the pub elevation here, there's a front, rear and side canopy. This is a proposal. As you see, the existing extension to the side is removed, and there's that small canopy area there. The pub retained with an extension to the rear as well on here. And if we go forward to the floor plans, you can see the ground floor and the first floor pub plans here. The first floor has guest accommodation, which has been refurbished and improved, and the second floor will contain a flat which will be particularly for the staff, so it will be ancillary to the use of the pub and not a separate unit. If you look at some photographs of the site, here they have the pub around the roundabout and variations thereof. And I think to look briefly, just to go briefly through the principle of the development, it is in countryside beyond the greenbelt, but within the defined settlement boundary. It's built on land. It makes a significant contribution to the character and amenity of the village. We accept that, and therefore we do need to, with any development proposal, to take account of local form, building style, not generate incomparable levels of traffic. We think, therefore, that on balance it's acceptable in principle, this proposed development. And in terms of the viability of the community facility, the community asset is a pub and a garden. It's not the pub alone, and the pub will be retained. The study that was commissioned, the Fleurette study, is look at the proposed development will reduce the number of covers from 70 to 68 in the pub restaurant, so it will be a very small reduction there. And also it felt that the pub would be viable as a smaller entity, and that the 16 car parking spaces would be sufficient capacity on site. Now we'll talk a little bit later on about access and car parking, but in terms of the visual amenity and impact on the conservation area, we have given considerable weight to the asset and its conservation. It should be proportionate in degree to the asset. The Bull's Head is an undesignated asset, but the loss of the ancillary buildings and pub gardens regrettable, but we think it's outweighed by the positive provision of new housing, retention of the pub and the provision of a new beer garden. So the detailing of the pub and the houses is very important, and therefore we're looking at and have recommended the imposition of a condition providing greater details of that and large-scale plans before commencement of development. In terms of the dwelling mix and density, we felt that quoted 130 to 190 square metres in floor area. It is towards a larger type of housing, 3, 4, 5 bed, and that would be a departure from policy H4, but there was a study commissioned by the applicants looking, and given the site's constraints and the outcome of that study, the demand for larger housing in this site was considered to be something which would outweigh policy H4. And therefore we feel that in this circumstance the dwelling mix is acceptable. In terms of trees, the arboricultural officer has confirmed that most of these aren't worthy of retention, but has singled out the Douglas fir and the ash as being of some significant merit. Therefore, as a condition, we would require a scheme of landscape mitigation and planting to try and offset any loss of amenity as a result of the trees to be felled. In terms of highways access and parking, there was originally objection from the County Highways Authority regards to whether there was or not car parking capacity on sites regarding the pub. Now, further transport survey was done in August, as set out in the description of the application and how it amplified it. That was found on one occasion to have a capacity of 92%, on another to have a capacity around about the 46% mark. Because of that, the County Highways concluded there was capacity on site, which backed up the Fleuret study, which suggested the same thing, and that therefore they withdrew their objection on the basis of that. With regard to the housing, the 11 spaces there are in accordance with the car parking standards that we use, and therefore we feel that subject to the relevant conditions around parking management, access and so on there is no, we have no objection, and indeed the County Highways Authority have no objection in terms of highways access and parking. I think in terms of other matters, services, biodiversity, archaeology, these matters, we feel that they can be covered by conditions and they are set out in the reports. So in conclusion, I'm recommended, subject to the conditions, that planning permission be granted.
Thank you, Miles. This is a public speaking item, and the procedure is detailed on the back of the laminated cards on your seats, and I believe the procedure has been explained to you. May I invite the supporter, Mark Harris, to speak? Good evening, Mr. Harris. You have 4 minutes from when you begin speaking.
Good evening, members, and thank you for allowing me to speak this evening. My name is Mark Harris, and I'm representing Fratton Developments. I'm speaking in support of the proposal and to endorse the officer's recommendation. Fratton Developments is an established property company with extensive experience in delivering quality developments in the south of England. Fratton has engaged an experienced team to design a high-quality and sustainable development, which resulted in the proposal before you. As owner of the public house, a key priority for the applicant has been to formulate a scheme that seeks to retain and refurbish what is a valued and recognised community asset. You may be aware that the public house has been deteriorating and has been in need of investment for a significant period now. This proposal will achieve that and secure its long-term viability as a result of the proposed refurbishment works and wider improvements. This includes the provision of a new pub garden, which is of an appropriate size and will contribute towards savings in operational costs and thus profitability. The rationale behind the proposed works and the effect on the public house has been the subject of an independent assessment by Fleuret, a recognised expert in the field appointed to advise your council. Fleuret agreed with our own assessment that the proposed development and improvements will safeguard the long-term viability of the pub. This is an important conclusion as it offers independent evidence that the proposal will offer a beneficial opportunity to safeguard and enhance this important asset of community value. Such investment will not proceed without the proposal. Aside from the benefits of the Bull's Head, the scheme has been the subject of extensive consultation with the community and engagement with your officers. A leaflet was circulated to neighbouring residents in February to invite feedback on the proposals, and a presentation was made to Ewhurst Parish Council in March. Also, at the Parish Council's request, the pre-application consultation period was extended to provide a wider section of the community to comment on the proposals. Following the application's submission, all statutory bodies were consulted and no objections were raised, as identified in the officer's report. And then the images displayed in the case officer's presentation demonstrate the applicant's commitment to providing a high-quality scheme of exemplary designed dwellings which will create a real sense of place. The materials and finishes on each dwelling will create an attractive scheme which will contribute to this part of the conservation area and the design quality and character of Ewhurst. In light of the design and landscape officer's comments and support for the scheme, we believe we have independent confirmation that it is in line with the character of the conservation area and appropriately designed. The scheme has also been scrutinised closely and found acceptable in relation to issues that have been the subject of representation. Surrey County Highways and Fleuret have both found the level of public house car parking to be acceptable. The number of residential parking spaces are also in accordance with standards. Officers have also concluded the scheme will have no highway safety concerns. The scheme will deliver new family-sized accommodation within the settlement boundary to contribute towards your council's housing requirement. The mix of accommodation, as highlighted, has also been accepted based on an independent assessment of the local housing market. The loss of trees is addressed via a comprehensive landscape scheme that includes new planting to outweigh the loss. Any impact that is identified, we believe, is also more than outweighed by the safeguarding and improvement of the public house and the sympathetically designed dwellings. We believe the proposal represents a high-quality scheme which is sensitive to the character and appearance of the village and conservation area. Above all, it represents a significant and important opportunity to safeguard the Bull's Head area, ACV, asset of community value. We hope you agree with the officer's recommendation before you, which we strongly endorse. And thank you for providing me with the opportunity to speak this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. No opponent has registered to speak on this application tonight, so I open it up to the members. Councillor Henry.
Thank you, Chairman. Also, thank you for the site visit and to those people who attended it on Monday. There has been adverse reactions to these proposals throughout the village, and I would like to have the opportunity to express my personal concerns for this application for 4 properties, parking and landscape. The proposed development is in a very prominent position within the village. This is the conservation on the north access to the village with the crossroads of Sheer, Dorking and Horsham. And the Bull's Head pub is one of the main focal points of the village. The 35-metre long terrace would, I consider, have a devastating impact on the locality. This is a sensitive area, and this work would not in the least preserve enhance the historical character of this area. I believe it to be inappropriate. Furthermore, the traffic and parking would be nightmarish. As I say, this is a setting that attracts people. It attracts visitors to the Surrey Hills, to Ewhurst and to the Bull's Head pub in particular. It's the setting itself, and we weren't really able to see that from the diagrams that we saw on the overhead projections, is quintessentially an English country setting with the village green, the pretty houses, the picture book setting, the open space, the off-street car parking. We should also bear in mind that the Bull's Head does provide employment to local people. There's not a lot of employment in Ewhurst. The Bull's Head itself is now the only sole pub within the village. And it's one of the most cherished village assets, and in the community asset report, which was prepared in the last year, together with working in hand with the neighbourhood plan, it was flagged up the function room, the bed and breakfast accommodation, the garden, the off-street parking. This is a very valuable and cherished asset. And recently, the Bull's Head pub has been listed as a community asset in the Waverley registers. The huge reduction in the parking facilities, the loss of open space, would have a major impact on the area, the huge impact on the vitality of this village asset. I keep repeating these words because I do feel very strongly about all this. There are no guarantees that the pub, would it be furnished, would happen. The significance of harm to the pub and the environments, that the trees, the traffic, it doesn't justify the building of these 4 houses. 2 of which are 5-bedroomed houses. One is a 4-bedroom, another is a 3-bedroom. The mixture is contrary to local need and to the local policy. And it's also contrary to the emerging Ewhurst neighbourhood plan, which is very important to those of us in Ewhurst. I'm going to put it down there at the moment and open it up for further discussion to enable the other councillors to have a say in the matter. And I'd like to come back at the end of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Henry. Would anybody else like to speak? Councillor Byam.
I was hoping to follow on, but nobody else has raised their hand. Yes, I listened to the presentation by the supporter with some interest. There was one little sentence that strung very strongly to mine. He said there was a create a sense of space. I think it should be putting a quart into a pint pot. How do you cram 4 houses in a row? I think value, unless I'm incorrect, it's 1 5-bedroom, 2 4-bedroom and 1 3-bedroom house. Where is there amenity space, sufficient amenity space for that number of bedrooms? It desecrates the conservation area. The parking facilities are insufficient, I would suggest, and having cars driving onto and reversing out onto a road very close to a roundabout where the traffic, the predominance of traffic will be travelling around the edge of the Bull's Head and not coming from across, I don't think, across the roundabout itself and swinging around that corner. The delivery vehicles and waste wagons, etc., would either drive into the access road at the side and then have to reverse out because there's clearly no room there for them to be able to manoeuvre and come out, or they park on the road, creating a severe hazard to traffic that's travelling around that particular area. We're losing trees. The biggest thing to me is the conservation area, but all of the other aspects to me are also very important, and I cannot see a way that I can support this application.
Thank you. Councillor Seaborn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Looking at the design, I mean, I actually think it's quite a well thought through design, but I have to say what strikes me is that it's the right development in totally the wrong place. The loss of visual amenity by putting houses where they're proposed just seems it would be absolutely devastating to a quintessentially British Surrey street scene, or lack of street scene, if you like. I suspect the fact that we went to see it on a beautiful autumn morning and got the very best of the what's on offer probably enhances the strength of my view. But to take away what that offers to the whole community by putting in what is quite a nice development, but in the wrong place, I think would be absolutely devastating to the village. And the other issue is I fully accept that the parking studies have been done. While we were there, we watched a bus trying to manoeuvre past, with great difficulty, past parked cars to do its turn around the green that's there. It really struggled to get past what was there, and there weren't a particularly large number of cars there. So, much of the time, I suspect parking would not be an issue, but there will be occasions when the pub is full, that the capacity, which is significantly reduced, I think would not be adequate. I'm always reluctant to go against professional advice, but when you've actually been standing there watching a bus struggle to get past the cars that were there, it changes your perspective somewhat. So I'm really struggling to support this. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Ellis.
Thank you, Chairman. I've actually been crossing off all the comments that I would wish to make against, I'm afraid, this application, as each of my colleagues have already identified them. I do think it's quite a pleasant-looking development. I know the area quite well. I'm driving in that area quite regularly, and I really do believe that although this is quite a pleasant proposal for development, as my colleague said, is in absolutely the wrong place. It's an overdevelopment of the site. It would have, to my mind, a detrimental impact on the amenity value of the village. And I mean, looking at it there and actually knowing the area and the properties that are there, I just don't feel that this sits happily within the site, within the village. So that I think the loss of visual amenity is actually too much. And I don't feel that I can support the application. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Woroszewski.
Thank you, Chairman. When I first saw this on paper, I thought it was quite good, and I wholeheartedly agree with some of the comments made by Councillor Seaborn. But having said that, there's a number of concerns that come about this, and one for me is the height and the mass. It shows a 3-storey building squashed into the middle of that. I think it was 35 metres long terrace described by Councillor Val Henry. It also concerns me deeply that the County Highway withdrew their objection. I think that's of some great concern. The loss of trees, I think it also, there's so many things here that is wrong, and it's a shame because I think there was an opportunity here to do something really creative, more creative. The one thing that worries me more than anything else is we talk about this being an asset, and it certainly is an asset. I know this particular pub very, very well. And on page 35 we see there's been 3 letters being received expressing support for the following reasons, and the second one is that the scheme would refurbish the pub, danger, otherwise it would close if planning permission refused. I don't think that's a material planning consideration when we're looking at 2 separate identities here. We had a very similar situation with a pub in Cranley, which was very dependent on development in the rear of its premises to secure its viability going forward. But we've got to be very careful here in doing that we don't set a precedence and that it's not inappropriate, and this does nothing to fulfil our housing need. So regrettably I can't support the officers on this one, but I do actually think it was a scheme that was creative, but like has been said before me, a good scheme but in the wrong place, and viability to support the pub is something that's a difficult one, but I don't think in this case that it justifies the action. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. I tend to agree with everything that's been said. It is a good design, I thought, and it's a pity we haven't got a street scene to show how it sits alongside the pub, because I think that would have been quite illustrative. But it's obviously it's too big for the site, and I think this is highlighted by the fact that the right-hand unit is within 30 centimetres of the boundary fence, and in fact the chimney breast that projects out from that is right tight on the boundary. And I can just imagine what officers would say if somebody came and, well, they say in their extension supplementary planning guidance that 2-storey extensions should be a metre away from the boundary, and I think they've just tried to cram, in my opinion, they've tried to cram too much onto this site, and it's resulted in a scheme which looks good on paper, but I think would just harm the characters. It's a beautiful area there looking onto the green, and I think it deserves something better. Sorry, that's me having my rant. Anybody else like to say anything? Well, Councillor Henry, would you like to sum up?
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, fellow councillors. The simple truth is that that any development on this site which occupies all the garden will have an unacceptable impact on the character and appearance of this conservation area. The pub is a very good asset, and the harm caused by this development, I believe, cannot be justified or overcome by the refurbishment of the pub, nor of the building of those 4 houses. I therefore cannot agree with the officer's recommendations.
Thank you. So the recommendation is that subject to conditions 1 to 18, deletion of condition 19, and subject to renumbered conditions 19 to 25, previously 20 to 26, as set out on pages 54 to 63 of the report, and amendment to condition 24 as set out on the update sheet, plus informatives 1 to 8 as set out on the report, permission be granted. May I have those in favour of the recommendation to grant?
That's 0.
And those against?
That's 6 unanimous.
Thank you, members. The recommendation to grant is rejected. So now, members, could I have some suggestions for reasons that the officers can use for the refusal of this application? Councillor Henry.
I start the ball rolling, and then you'll find out whether my shopping list is the type of shopping list you want to hear about. Inappropriate development within the conservation area doesn't meet the housing needs, so it offers no significant contribution to the local housing needs. No financial incentive for the village. The urbanising effect. Inadequate parking provision, the adverse impact on neighbouring properties. That's my starter list.
Councillor Byrne, did you wish to add to that list?
Councillor Henry came up with the first one, which is exactly what I was going to say and did say at the very beginning. It's inappropriate development in the conservation area. I also think it's the parking issues. We don't want to overload the reason for refusal. I think we've got really strong reasons. In other cases, we've had, in Bramley for instance, we've had some very strong support for our conservation area. I'm very surprised actually that the officers have felt able to bring this one through, and this is the conservation area people I mean. It's just totally wrong for that area, a very beautiful part of the village, and should be protected. As it has been, as being in a conservation area. So I don't think any more that I can add, but if somebody else comes forward with other one, I don't think we should be holding any form of torch up to suggest that we would accept any form of development on this site. We have to come forward at a later date and it be considered in full. So I wouldn't want anything put into that reason, but I don't think we would put that in anyway.
I wouldn't necessarily agree with that, but officers, would you like to comment on the reasons put forward thus far?
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I think there's sort of three sort of distinct reasons that have come for all members. I'll go through them in detail in a moment. There's a couple of points that are raised which I'd like to just provide a bit of advice on in terms of suitability of recommending such a reason for refusal. One of the points was raised about the parking requirements and meeting the guidelines. Obviously, the council has the adopted guidelines, and it would meet that requirement. So I'd be mindful to take account of it being acceptable on those grounds and meeting our adopted guidelines. Appreciate their guidelines to take away. So I would recommend away from a reason for refusal that picks up on those grounds. It wasn't specifically mentioned just then, but the comment was raised on regard to safety in highway matters and access. I think Councillor Forozeski touched on it already, but the point was the County Highway Authority have considered this, and we do have to take their advice on that. And a departure from their advice, which is a no objection subject to conditions, we'd have to provide suitable evidence to support that. And their professional view as a highway authority is that what the scheme before us is acceptable on those grounds. So again, an officer recommendation would be not to include those reasons for refusal based on the Highway Authority's advice, which have reconsidered additional information and they've looked at it in detail. There's one point about financial incentive, and it might be just to be more of a question what specifically that was looking for, whether it's a financial contribution towards some infrastructure or something along those lines. It's more a question, just back to Councillor Henry, just to clarify that position, and then I'll provide a further comment, and then I'll go into the other detailed potential reasons. Thank you, Chairman.
I haven't got anything in mind, but it was obviously missing.
Thank you, Chairman. Other members, do you want to come back?
Yes, Councillor Vorozhevsky and then Councillor Byrne.
Thank you, Chairman. Peter, thank you for that explanation, and forgive me, maybe I've missed it somewhere, but on the highways issue, they talk about imposing conditions. Now, those conditions, that's when they would withdraw their objections if the conditions were imposed, and they won't be imposed if it does not get granted. So can we not go back to the highways and say, yeah? And I would like to add to that, if it hasn't already been said, overdevelopment of the site. Thank you.
The point that Councillor Henry was just trying to deal with regard to contributions to in Section 106 agreement, etc., I don't think that's appropriate in this case anyway. I think there are strong reasons why we all believe that this is not the correct development, and any form of cash coming forward for whatever development, it does not satisfy and close that situation off.
Peter, would you like to sum up those reasons for refusal then, please?
Of course, thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Barham. I think you picked up on the point regarding the financial contributions. It doesn't meet the trigger where we can necessarily secure that. Just one other point before I go through to conditions. Sorry, apologies. Councillor Forozeski, those conditions are recommended, and if they were to go to appeal or something, that would overcome any highway concern. So we wouldn't necessarily put it as a reason for refusal, but they would have to. It's subject to those conditions. It's acceptable, and that would be applied in the event the planning permission was granted. So it would overcome that. If I go into the reasons or potential reasons for members to consider taking away, the first one would be proposal by virtue of its height, mass, and extent of development would result in a cramped form of development and amount to an overdevelopment of the site. As such, the proposals would be contrary to policies D1 and D4 of the local plan and paragraph 17 of the MPPF. The second one picks up on the conservation area specifically. The proposal would cause less than substantial harm to designated heritage asset, to an undesignated heritage asset and to the designated heritage asset, which is the conservation area. It would fail to preserve or enhance the character of an appearance of the conservation area. The benefits of the proposal would not outweigh the harm to the heritage asset. Consequently, the proposal would be contrary to policies D1, D4 and HE5 of the Waverley local plan and paragraphs 128 to 134 of the MPPF. We had a third reason as well in terms of the housing mix. This is a policy of local planning authority as set out in policy H4 of the local plan to ensure an appropriate mix of dwellings and appropriate provision of dwellings suitable for small households. The development does not adequately respond to the evidence market demand and would not meet local housing requirements as set out in the West Surrey Strategic Housing Market Assessment. As such, the proposal is contrary to paragraph 15 of the MPPF and H4 of the local plan. Hopefully that picks up a point. Apologies. Just on the second reason for refusal with regards to the conservation area, I just want to quote the specific policy which relates to conservation areas. It's HE8 and not HE5. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillors, are we happy with those reasons? Are we agreed that those are the reasons for refusal that we would like to be put forward? Agreed. Thank you very much. Switched it off. There are no items to consider in exempt session, so that concludes this meeting this evening. Thank you, members. Thank you, members of the public.